Dogman. In my backyard. Dear Scary Stories NYC. Way back when I was 21 years old, I had multiple encounters with one or possibly more dogmen in the woods while camping. A few weeks afterward, I witnessed them again in my backyard in western upstate New York. They had traveled 1,200 miles through 7 states. Had they been tracking us the entire way? Or was this just random? Before my wife and I were married, we experimented with cohabitation by going camping and sharing the same tent. This was back in the later 1970s. Our college friend came along. We'll call him Big Basil. I liked having this giant friendly guy along for protection against whatever we might encounter, and my now wife, who we can call Doris, felt safer around me if her very loyal friend Basil was there. It took her a while to fully trust me. I'll jump straight into our first encounter. We were eating a sort of a fancy dinner for our first night of camping. We bought cheap steaks at the supermarket before venturing off, as we always like to have red meat on our first night. We'd eat trail mix and canned beans the rest of the way, but it seemed easier to take after a steak that first night. Needless to say, this was before any of us turned vegan. Basil was the first to notice that the smell of us grilling steaks had attracted some dogs toward our camp. You could just make them out here and there now and then, hiding in the bushes and trees in the darkness beyond camp. You'd see their eyes reflecting, shining in the campfire for a few seconds. Then, you'd see the shape of a dog move in front of or behind something out there. Just these little glimpses, but we would get a lot of them. We were feeling very loose that night. We were in extremely relaxed moods, and we thought it was sweet that dogs were interested in us. None of us sensed any danger at all. We started tearing off pieces of meat and tossing them over toward the woods, where we could see the dogs hiding and watching us. None of them came out to take any of the meat, though. All through our meal, we called the pooches over and tossed food in their general direction. When we were done eating and the dogs still hadn't come out to get their scraps yet, we wondered if they might be too timid to come closer to us. All 3 of us felt sorry for them, and we threw our bones up into the woods, crashing into the bushes, closer this time to where the dogs actually were. We were trying to be helpful to these poor shy doggies. And then 2 of the dogs emerged from the darkness, and I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. They seemed far larger than I had expected them to be when I was just seeing shadows and flashing eyes. These creatures looked extraordinary, almost like ponies with shaggy wolf fur. A very long-legged wolf, and another one trailing after it that was more of a tan color, not quite as tall. They both trotted over to the spot we had been tossing our scraps to, and they sniffed the ground. Then, out of nowhere, and for no obvious reason, they both stood up like bears. A suddenly very serious Basil poured water on our fire, both figuratively and literally, and then sternly instructed me and Doris to get into our tent and zip it up. Doris scooched inside. While waiting my turn to do the same, I watched that larger of the 2 upright walking canines walk away, still on his hind legs, leaving our scraps untouched. I assumed the other one followed the first, but I only watched for a few seconds before jumping inside and zipping up. I told Doris that I was pretty sure they were leaving, and I didn't think they were going to bother us. She asked me if I felt safe enough to go back out there in the complete darkness with our campfire doused and wet. I didn't suppose that I did. I also wasn't sure those 2 creatures were done with us. Why had they rejected our offering of food? Were they already full? Or were they after larger prey? I remember how uncomfortable and panicked we were that night. We held each other for a while, then tried to sleep. I thought I heard something moving outside, which made me jump up, waking Doris. She woke me up later in essentially the same manner for approximately the same reason. It was an uncomfortable night, let's put it that way. In the morning, Basil ordered us into the car at dawn. We went to a breakfast place that he knew, then ended up moving to a different campground that was 15 or 16 miles north of the last one. This one was up near Brooklyn, Mississippi. Thank God for our friend Big Basil. He was from that area. In fact, he was the only reason we were so far from home. The three of us at that time shared a house with two other former classmates. It was a rental all the way up north near Little Valley in western upstate New York. We loved to camp in western Pennsylvania and upstate New York. Each time we did, though, Basil would talk about how we should go camping in this place down south that he had loved since he was a kid. That was the longest trip we ever made as a trio. It took most of a day to drive straight through, and it took 2 days because we rested somewhere in the middle on the way back. There were so many great places to get fresh air near where we lived in New York that it seemed dumb to go that far away again after that trip. Bad luck, too, since it only led to us being harassed by dogmen. Basil didn't call them dogmen or werewolves. He called the two creatures we saw loup-garou. I'm not sure if that's really what they were, but that was what Basil decided they were. He had grown up with stories of the werewolves that live in the swamps and bayous and forests. He told us that he never knew if they were real or just characters in scary bedtime stories, but he knew that in all the stories they were bad news to have come in contact with. Usually it was assumed these creatures were witches or sorcerers who had transformed themselves deliberately into this canine form. Some of the stories that Basil had heard, though, insisted that the loup-garou were men cursed to walk the earth in half canine form as punishment for something they had done in their past. In all cases, though, they were to be feared, and they were to be avoided if at all possible. It felt like Basil talked about the loup-garou through breakfast, then on the drive north, and then all the rest of the day, too. At any rate, once we set up in the tiny cabin we had rented this time, we fell back into a relaxed state. The cabin was set back from the other campsites and cabins out of their direct line of sight. It felt private, more like we were out deep in the wilderness than just on the other side of the trees from a bunch of families in RVs and a nice clean, well-lit building with toilets, sinks, and showers. We cooked over the campfire out in front of the little wooden building. We joked around with each other. Then we fell in for a good long night's sleep. I have to say, it was easier to sleep surrounded by solid wooden walls than it had been trying to sleep inside our tent the night earlier. The next night, though, our second night in the cabin, after we were refreshed and feeling more alive again, would prove to be even more eventful than our first night back in Wiggins. Doris and I were awakened in the middle of the night by Basil slamming the door to our cabin. This place was literally 2 beds, 3 windows, and a desk, and Big Basil staring at us with giant eyes, leaning back against the cabin door, panting and heaving air into and out of his lungs. He was covered in mud. He seemed kind of funny in that moment, but before I could laugh, I thought I also saw blood on him, mixed in with the mud and dirt. Basil managed to croak out that we'd been followed. Followed? Followed by who? Followed by them. You know, them. Them? I know them? Which them do I know? The loup-garou. Oh, those them. Doris and I staggered out of bed to look out the front windows as bam! Right there in those windows we could see those dog-headed men looking right back in at us. I did what anyone would do. I pulled the curtains shut. We asked Basil what happened to him out there, and he answered us. His answer, however, would likely get flagged as shocking by YouTube, so we're going to put it out as today's secret uncensored story for our channel members and PayPal subscribers. The end result of what happened to him in the woods that night is that Basil ran back to us, panicked. He whispered to us about what he had just seen in the woods, and as he did, I saw him look past me, out the back window. Turning around, I saw what froze him. I saw what I had seen 2 nights prior, looking right in that back window, back at me. That back window with no curtain for me to pull shut. Basil and Doris were panicking, asking each other questions like, will they try to break in here? And, are they strong enough to break in here? Neither of them knew the answers to each other's questions, but they kept asking each other anyway. I, on the other hand, had this opposite kind of reaction. I felt so drowsy. I climbed back into bed and told myself that the door would hold. I told myself that the Dogman wouldn't try to break in through the windows. I was so tired. I was in a half-dream state, and I sort of felt like I could collaborate in deciding how the world worked, like you do in a dream. I was in that state where nothing made sense, except to go back to sleep. Just a little more sleep. That'll solve everything. I heard the sound of glass crashing, and I was fully awake. Were they breaking in? None of us knew where that sound had come from. It sounded like one of the windows had broken, but we didn't see any glass around on the floor anywhere. Doris and Basil jumped into bed with me because my bed was set against the only wall in the tiny cabin that had no window in it. We must have looked like the Three Stooges. We literally had our backs to the wall as we pulled out our Swiss Army knives. Those were the closest things to weapons that we had brought with us. We could hear them walking around outside. Sometimes one of them would walk past the back window and look right in directly at us. It was an incredibly surreal moment when that would happen. We'd be looking at them outside the window, and they'd be looking in at us inside the cabin, huddled together on the bed. It was a moment that seemed to last forever, staring into those strange, bright, white, shining eyes, feeling like they were staring back at you, past you, and inside you all at once. And then the spell would be snapped and broken, and the dog-headed man outside the window would walk away. I counted 3 different men out there, dogmen I mean. They seemed to take turns, coming by and looking in, and then walking away again. They seemed to me to be humans with dog heads, not animals. I don't necessarily mean literally human, but I mean intelligent. A tribe of some sort of people who are more like dogs than we are. Maybe not human being kind of people, but some kind of people. Maybe it was just their size and their apparent coordination with each other that gave them a scary sense of sophistication. Morning came with the sounds of birds singing and the sun beginning to come out. I was trying to remember if I had heard a single animal sound all night when the dogmen were there. It sure seemed silent, but that could have been my panicked mind blocking out the sound, or just faulty memory. I asked Doris and Basil how many dogmen they thought were out the back window looking in at us that night. Doris told me she lost count. She said each one that looked in that back window was a different dogman. Basil said he thought they were the same one every time. He said he saw 2 when he was outside, and assumed that there were 2 out there, but he only saw the one dogman looking in the window. I explained my side of it, which was that there was one who was darker and taller than the others. He had a very tall face with a slightly less pronounced snout. Then there was the silvery gray one with a long snout that mostly resembled a wolf. Finally, I had seen a dog-like entity with silvery fur and darker specks and stripes, almost like tiger markings, but far more subdued, with longer and shaggier or bushier fur. They both looked at me like I was crazy. To Doris, there had to be a dozen or more of the dogmen. To Basil, there were only 2, the same 2 that we had seen 2 nights earlier. One thing we all agreed upon, however, was that we should get out of that place and go straight home. We could have a barbecue in the backyard once we got back. That was all the out-of-doors we wanted for the rest of that summer. It was a huge relief to get back to our rented house near a little valley in upstate New York. This is the place that I think I told you we shared with Basil and another couple that we had gone to college with. It was a really nice house that had once belonged to a rich family, but had become harder to rent in more recent years. It wasn't really located conveniently to anything. We were young though, and we didn't mind traveling a little further to get where we needed to go. It was all of our first time living outside of dorms or our parents' houses, so we also didn't mind a bit of extra privacy, being back in the woods the way we were. There are large swaths of nature all around that area. To the north is the Cattaraugus State Forest. Then to the northeast is Dobbins Memorial State Forest. Directly to the east is McCarty Hill State Forest, and to the southeast of us is the Rock City State Forest. Perhaps most interesting, however, at least to me, is the fact that the place we lived was directly north of Bucktooth State Forest, which lies in the direction of where we saw the Dogman while camping. Does anyone, or can anyone, really keep track of what creatures walk through these forests? Could cryptids of legend and lore actually, in real life, be using our state and national forests as means of traveling state to state, region to region? If so, how have they gone undetected by science and government? The reason I'm asking these questions will become apparent shortly. Things got back to normal pretty quickly around the house. Doris and I would kid Basil that he grew up in Werewolf Town, USA. We'd tell him that we never wanted to visit his part of the world ever again, and he would joke around back with us. He always took things in a good spirit. I can't speak for the others, but I was ecstatic to be home in upstate New York, feeling safe, finally. And then, around 3 weeks after we'd gotten home, something happened to destroy our sense of safety and privacy permanently. We had one of our backyard cookouts just for the 5 of us, plus somebody's friend that was sleeping over. Afterward, we heard the sound of thunder and decided to clean up fast and relocate inside before everyone and everything got drenched. The other guys and I were carrying the larger things inside, and the women were washing and storing what we were bringing in. I was about to go outside and get the last few things when Doris grabbed my shoulder and told me to stop. She and the other young woman by the sink were staring out the window with this look on their faces like they were witnessing man walking on Mars for the first time. Like, not fear, but definitely not happy either. Just stunned, disbelieving. The look one gets when their entire worldview has been drastically changed in one single second. I moved quickly to look through the same window that they were looking through, and I saw what they were seeing. I felt like I knew what I was going to see a second or two before I saw it. I don't think that was a premonition. I think my mind just snapped the puzzle pieces into place a second before reality did. There he was. That main, largest dogman out there, the one with the tall face. I had little doubt that his paler shadow was somewhere in the trees behind him, same as he had been down south. We had at least 2 dogmen in our yard behind the house. I felt my sense of safety leave me, never to return. I've never felt safe again for my entire life. And I tell you, feeling safe is not really that necessary for your happiness. In fact, I now think it can damage your chances for survival. I'm not a wise man, and I have little advice to pass on that I am certain is correct and useful, but I can tell you this one thing for sure. It was a lucky day for me when the Dogman stripped me of my feeling of security and safety. He dragged me into a world of alertness instead of panic. A life where every moment is alive to you, the same as it was when you were a little kid. Instead of projecting an imaginary, safe cartoon world out of my eyes and ears, then getting upset when reality interfered with the illusion, I've been able to live in the real world, experiencing every single moment as something entirely new and completely fascinating. Every single second is a teaching moment, and I'm the student. We live in a world where you can try your best to live a boring life, and then a clan of upright, intelligent dogs will follow you across half the country just to make sure you never feel that you really understand the world at all ever again. Seeing that Dogman outside that window on that night humbled me. It also humbled me about the entire human race. It stopped me from believing authority figures, since I now saw that most experts know nothing more than what we know. Sometimes less. No expert in any field in the entire world then or now will tell you that there are canine creatures as tall as a really big man walking back and forth across state lines. Yet, this is what we seem to have witnessed. How had they walked the entire way from that campsite to my home? Although I mentioned all the natural area between us and Mississippi, I don't believe there are national and state parks connected together for them to have traveled through for the entire trip. There had to have been stages during the journey where they either walked down streets or traveled underground. The idea that they wouldn't have been seen multiple times during this long trip seems unlikely to me. Then again, how many people would actually report a Dogman sighting anyway? I would guess that most people who have these experiences would likely keep the stories to themselves. Nobody likes to be ridiculed. Sometimes you can even lose your job or your entire family because you reported a cryptid sighting. So, what were we supposed to do about this situation? Assuming these were the same Dogman, and assuming they had deliberately trailed us for 1,200 miles, how could we get away from them? We couldn't move. They would obviously catch up to us sooner or later. Doris asked a friend of hers to come over who was related to an elder in their tribe. They don't want us to reveal their name, tribe, or even gender, so I have to be careful how I phrase this next part. The native person said they were unaware of Lugaroo or werewolf-type creatures at all, but that didn't mean they disbelieved in them. They presented a theory that we might have seen some kind of negative spirit that appeared wolf-like to us, even though that might not be their actual form. Maybe the entity or entities just didn't want us to know what they really looked like, or maybe our minds wouldn't understand what we were seeing. I wasn't sure that made sense, but I had already had my worldview drastically altered once that week, so why not twice? This individual burned some kind of smudge stick, I think they called them. They had us show them the edge of the property we were renting, and they walked all around the perimeter, saying something under their breath and getting their incense or whatever it was all over the place. I have expected to see the Dogman again that night because I didn't really believe this would do anything, but it didn't happen. We stayed in that house together through the next spring, and none of us ever saw the Dogman again. I don't know if that ritual had anything to do with it, or if the creatures were just done with us anyway, but in either case we never saw them again. I spent most of my adult life after that living in a major city and staying in a small apartment way up in the sky. It's only since 2019 that we've moved back upstate to a quiet little home in a peaceful little woods, about a 90-minute drive north of Utica. I love it here. I love it having a backyard to look out at again. Although I never look out there with that smug sense of security that I did in my younger days. I know that anytime I look out onto my own personal property, I never know when my eyes will see Dogman in my backyard. Our executive producer is Cheyenne, far spicier than Cayenne. Please join us in thanking Cheyenne Broomfield for making this episode possible. In return, they gain access to our secret uncensored stories far too wild to tell on this channel. You can hear those stories too. Just join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com, or else do what Cheyenne Broomfield did and click that join link under this or any of our videos. Now, here's our spokes dog Henry Lee Dogman to explain any details I may have left out. Hank? Thanks for watching till the end. If you liked what you saw, please consider clicking like on the video or sharing it with your friends and family that you think might also be interested. If you would like to see more of our work, please consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon next to the subscribe button so that YouTube will alert you when we put out a new video. To become a channel member and gain access to our special perks, you can click that join link under each of our videos. Another option is to join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. You can join for as little as 99 cents on YouTube or $1.50 at peterbernard.com, and that gains you access to our weekly secret uncensored episodes. If you'd like to see our 21 hours of archives of uncensored Dogman stories, then please join at the $3 level or above. To get to watch our shows in advance of the public, please join at our $10 level. That gets you all the perks. We're working on figuring out how to add the $10 level to the PayPal Club too. If you join our channel memberships, you need to check our community page here on YouTube in order to get the links to the secret videos and other perks. If you're in the PayPal Subscribers Club, Peter will email you all the news and links himself. Once joining the PayPal Club, which is Peter's homemade club, please give him a chance to see that you've joined and to compose you a personal welcome email, as none of that is automated. But whichever you join, we'll name you an executive producer for the next available episode. Do you have a scary experience that you'd like to share with us? You can email us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or call our Scary Stories voicemail hotline at 804-LA-SCARY. That's 804-537-2279. It's a Google voicemail box, so that means it keeps cutting off after every 3 minutes. If your story is longer than that, please keep calling back and we can piece it together on our end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.